about how much they like the guy and jump a few teams to go ahead and get him. And to me, I think the most interesting part is a lot of fans, they wanted an extra weapon. Even Aaron Rodgers said it himself. It'd be nice to get an extra weapon here in Green Bay. And instead, Goody goes a different route and trades up and grabs who looks like to be the successor for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show you, A, how much he likes Jordan Love, that he would trade up for him. It obviously makes the future for Aaron Rodgers and the franchise very cloudy. I mean, Packers fans are all too familiar with this situation based on what happened 15 years ago. The difference back then was it wasn't as uncommon to have a quarterback sit for 2-3 years before he took over. Now it's almost unheard of. So the question is, I'd be interested to hear from Brian Gutekunst, and we'll hear from him later tonight. Does he think in this day and age you can sit a quarterback for 3-4 years, knowing the way that rookie contracts work and it's more commonplace to get your quarterback in sooner rather than later? Or does this mean Aaron Rodgers maybe only has one more season rather than 3 or 4, like many of us thought that he had? It's going to be really interesting.
For me, another thing that to me that first reaction to this was, I wonder what Aaron Rodgers thinks, because I'm sure he's looking at other teams around the league, specifically in the NFC. You look at Cowboys, you look at the 49ers, you look at your divisional rival and the Minnesota Vikings. They grab explosive wide receivers who can immediately come in and make an impact. And instead, with the Packers, you get your potential successor. I'm sure that's probably not sitting right with Aaron Rodgers.
And I think also what it goes to show you is, a lot of, and you mentioned it earlier there, Chance, a lot of people wanted to add another weapon. Aaron Rodgers talked about adding another weapon. I think this shows that Brian, and this is a secondary storyline, but I think it shows that Goody has confidence in the weapons and the players that they have around Aaron Rodgers right now. The fact that he's willing to make an investment for the future. So, this is kind of a blessing or a vote of confidence for a guy like Alan Lazard when you look at the receivers, or a guy like Rick Wagner, who is just brought in as a right tackle. Goody clearly thinks those guys can be contributors on a Super Bowl contending team. Otherwise, he would have taken a pick to replace those guys, or at least compete with those guys on this team.
In addition to that, now you bring in Devin Funchess as well, too. So he probably likes what he sees there as well. And it's interesting, too, because if you look at some of the other guys on the board, if you don't go offense, you don't add an extra weapon offensively, you still have somebody like Patrick Queen on the board. And they decide to pass up on him as well. So it's really interesting, and I can't wait to hear Goody's comments later on tonight.
Yeah, we're expecting to hear from Jordan Love shortly, later on this evening. Brian Gutekunst as well, and potentially a scout or another member of the Packers front office via conference call. So there will be people from the Packers organization, including Brian Gutekunst, and also Jordan Love, the quarterback from Utah State, who was the pick, here talking to the media and answering our questions later on this evening. Again, if you're just joining us and you haven't heard yet, the Packers not only draft a quarterback, but trade up to draft a quarterback, Jordan Love from Utah State. I'm still looking for the terms of the trade here, exactly what they gave up. Obviously, their 30th pick was part of the deal. And then what else did you hear? It is right here from ESPN. Packers trade 30 and 136, which is a 4th round pick to move up 4 slots to the 26th spot. So that's not too bad. You trade a late 4th round pick and you go up and get your guy. But obviously the story here is one that's going to resonate in Green Bay for a long time. And that's, what is the situation with Aaron Rodgers? What does this mean for him? And what's next for the Packers?
So earlier today during the draft, Aaron Rodgers was on Pat McAfee's radio show, and he said, quote, that he'll track down the phone number and welcome him to the team tonight, whoever it was. And I'm sure, most people, like most fans, were thinking it probably was they might go offense, but like I said, instead it's the successor. So I thought it was really interesting that ESPN, one of the few interviews they had post-draft, they were able to get Jordan Love, and he seemed very excited to get to learn from Aaron Rodgers. So that's always a good sign, especially for development and the growth of a young quarterback, that you get to learn from a Hall of Famer and a guy like Aaron Rodgers.
And it's interesting. This was obviously a topic and a conversation point leading up to the draft of, do you draft a quarterback? Gutekunst talked about it earlier this week in his pre-draft press conference on Monday. And he said, if there's a guy out there who you feel can play in this league and play at a high level, you have to take him no matter where your team is at. And he obviously thinks Jordan Love can play at this league and play at a high level. And that's why he went up to take him. Let's get to some comments from our viewers and fans here on the NBC 26 Facebook page. Paul says, shocking. I'd agree. My wife, who's in the next room, can probably attest to that. I literally screamed, oh my God, they took a quarterback as soon as they did it. I think a lot of people might have had the same reaction. Joshua says, that one just went away, but I saw a ridiculous in there. There it is. Ridiculous. He's a reach at quarterback at best, and we really don't need a QB for 4 more years. I saw one fan chime in earlier and say, let's be honest, Rodgers hasn't been sharp for 3 years. I don't know that I agree with that. I mean, certainly there were times last year where he didn't look like the Aaron Rodgers of old, but he's still a top 10 at worst quarterback in this league. But this is clearly a pick for the future, whether that's 1 year down the road or maybe 3-4 years down the road, if you're going to reverse the trend of what we've been seeing from young quarterbacks lately and having to sit.
I think that's interesting that from the comment there that he said he didn't believe that Aaron Rodgers had looked as sharp as of lately. But if you look at sharp, he still was able to lead the Packers to a 13-3 record and a division title. And so once again, they were 1 game away from the Super Bowl. So you would think they would add an extra piece there or maybe shore up the offensive line, but instead they go a different route.
Barry says, we love you, Aaron, but we need to plan for the future. Getting a couple angry emojis here from Michael. So there's certainly feelings all over the board. And I go back to, just looking at my own personal experiences as a 14-year-old kid when Aaron Rodgers was drafted. I was confused as heck. Brett Favre was all I ever knew. And that's the guy who had been the quarterback of your team for 14, 15 years. And it's just fascinating here to see history repeat itself in a way. And hopefully for the organization, it plays out a little bit better this time and gets less ugly than it did last time. So we'll see if they have a transition in place. I think at this point, we're left with more questions than answers, and we'll obviously do our best to get answers for you and try to figure out what the plan is going forward.
To me, another thing that I thought was really interesting looking at kind of some of the reactions is after Jordan Love was picked, one of the comparisons, as you mentioned earlier, was Patrick Mahomes, and the other comparison was Blake Bortles. So that's a very high ceiling and a very low floor.
You could get a number of different things here, I think, depending how he develops. But the Packers have a very good history of developing quarterbacks. Obviously, they've had 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks back to back. As the 49ers and the Colts would tell you, other franchises who have had 2 really good quarterbacks back to back, it's hard to get that third. It's hard to get that third in a row. So we'll see if Jordan Love is that. We'll see how they can develop him. But Brian Gutekunst clearly has a plan with him for the future. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used that draft capital to trade up and get him.
And they still coming into day two tomorrow. They still have their 62nd pick. So they didn't trade that. So it'll be interesting to see what that. Maybe they do decide to go with the weapon. One of the things I thought was interesting as well was talking to Matt Schneidman from The Athletic, who's the beat writer covering the Packers. Was he wasn't shocked if he thought that Green Bay went in a different direction in the first round. He definitely didn't think it would be a quarterback, but maybe somebody on defense or maybe in the offensive line because this wide receiver class is so deep. So maybe they felt that they could find similar value late first round and maybe in that 62nd pick.
I'll close with this. A lot of people wondering what Aaron Rodgers is thinking right now. I am. I don't know when we'll hear from him next. They start off-season workouts next week, and normally Rodgers would address the media and talk a little bit. Obviously, it's different this year because of the pandemic and the way things are being handled, so I don't think we're going to have the same access to players that we normally would, so we might not hear from Rodgers for a while. But I did talk to Andrew Brandt last week, and he was on our show leading up to the draft tonight, our On the Clock special. The former Packers vice president knows Rodgers very well. He was the one who called him to tell him he was drafted in 2005. And I asked him about what he thinks Gutekunst is thinking, if it's the time to draft a quarterback. And he said, if anyone should understand it, it's Aaron, because he went through the same thing. And Aaron Rodgers is a very smart